is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, Mr. Trump is known to cause a bit of controversy, and perhaps more of that later on the programme. But back in 2015, I caused a hell of a stir. It was the general election. There was a leaders' debate. We were all there on the stage, and I wanted to raise the issue of health tourism. This is what I said. There are 7,000 diagnoses in this country every year for people who are HIV positive, which is not a good place for any of them to be, I know. But 60% of them are not British nationals. You can come into Britain from anywhere in the world and get diagnosed with HIV and get the retroviral drugs that cost up to £25,000 per year per patient. I know there are some horrible things happening in many parts of the world, but what we need to do is to put the National Health Service there for British people and families who in many cases have paid into this system for decades.
Thank you. Leanne Wood.
This kind of scaremongering rhetoric is dangerous.
It's a fact.
It's dangerous, it divides communities and it creates stigma to people who are ill, and I think you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Well, I'm sorry, we've got to put our own people first. I mean, would you, Leanne, open it up to 17,000 people, 27,000 people? Well, that was the general election debate back in 2015, and I can tell you that with the exception of the Daily Mail and many members of the public, I was virtually cast into pariah status by the leaders of all the other political parties and most of the press. It was as if I'd said something disgusting, wrong, and in many cases I was accused of exaggerating and that it was untrue. And I can tell you that in the weeks that followed that, I had some really quite heart-rending letters sent to me from HIV sufferers just talking about how the services that they had access to had gone down because the sheer number of people that were coming into Britain from around the world meant there was less to share around. So my view on this was established in 2015. I haven't backed down an inch on it, and I'm certainly not going to. And I find myself being supported on LBC by Nick Febuary, who feels incredibly strongly on this issue. And I'm pleased there are now some in the medical profession too. And in fact, a former leading cancer surgeon, Professor J. Marion Thomas, has said that the creaking NHS crisis could be solved if overseas patients were ordered to hand over cash. Now, the system that we have at the moment is that nobody that turns up has to produce ID, and when we do get people from the European Union, it would appear that when we send the governments the bill, it doesn't actually get paid. So the question I want to ask you tonight is it time that we got tough and put British citizens first? And if so, how do we do it? And I'm going to ask Brendan in Nottingham as our first caller tonight what he thinks. Brendan, good evening.
Hello there, Nigel. Yes, I believe it is time to get tough. In fact, it's long overdue. I think anything like this, it's interesting that the government's brought it up, whereas you mentioned it 2 years ago. But just like with grammar schools, they don't want to give UKIP the credit for something that they know the people want. Now, going back to what we should do, one of the things I think we should do is make medical insurance compulsory before people fly. Now, a lot of the medical profession, Nigel, say, look, if we've got someone that's ill or they broke their bone or something, where's your certificate? Where's your certificate? We're not interrogators. We're there to help people, to heal people. Now, if we go to America, common sense says we take medical insurance with us. Otherwise, we could end up having to remortgage our house to pay the bill over there. And I feel a lot of people, medical profession say, look, we can't sort of interrogate people. I personally feel there's a very easy answer to this. The airline companies at the moment, if we travel, let's say abroad, what are we required to show, amongst other things? Passport. Must have passport or no travel. Well, basically, anyone travelling into UK, the government makes arrangements with all air companies. Those people getting on that plane must have a passport and medical insurance or no fly. As simple as that, no fly.
Brendan, that would certainly solve the problem. Whether it would lead to a huge increase in bureaucracy, I mean, for example, if you board the Eurostar in Brussels and you're of Belgian nationality, I mean, equally, would you have to show insurance? I guess what you could do, if you're a regular traveller, is take out a regular annual insurance policy. Brendan, I'm not saying it's the solution, but it may well take us in the right direction. And certainly, in terms of what people think of my comments, that particular clip you heard was branded the next day in the media as Nigel Farage's shock and awful campaign. So there we go. So Brendan says everyone that comes to Britain should have to show they've got medical insurance. I wonder what Roy in Hinckley thinks. Roy, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. You have my admiration. I think, Brendan, your last call, I think he was absolutely bang on the nails there. There's absolutely no reason why we can't link medical insurance to the passport database so we know who's coming and who's not. But it's not entirely black and white, this situation, based on the fact that I do think it's unacceptable not to treat people who you haven't got time to get the details. You know what I mean? It's people that have had a heart attack that need treatment there and then. But what I don't see what we can't do is the fact that treat them all and then just remove it from the foreign aid budget and let Brussels have the cost of collecting it from the people, because obviously debt collection.
But Roy, come on, Roy, don't be so mean-spirited. I mean, the increase in the foreign aid budget was David Cameron's finest achievement as Prime Minister, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, we all know what we think about that then, don't we?
Well, just asking.
Yeah, it needs sorting out. There's a lot of people these days that are suffering and suffering and suffering because money has been removed and removed and removed from the National Health Service by the sheer amount of people in the country and the ones that are not paying as well. So something needs to be done about it.
Something needs to be done. No, right, I agree with that, and thank you very much indeed. And just to give some facts to all of you thinking about this, so the theory was that within the European Union there was no problem, because wherever we went in the European Union, we could access medical treatment, which indeed many expats do in France, and they get excellent medical treatment. And the same would apply for Poles and Lithuanians coming and working in Britain. And there'd be no problem at all, because we're all part of one big happy club, and it all works beautifully. And so what happens is that we send bills to each other for the treatment of their nationals in our countries. Well, let me just give you a fact. It has emerged that Britain pays out 675 million sterling every year for the care of Britons in Europe, while it receives back less than 50 million for treating European patients in Britain. I'll repeat that. We pay out 675 million a year because when other governments send us the bills for British nationals, we pay them, and when we send the bills out, they somehow get shuffled to the bottom of the pile, and we only get 50 million back. And I would argue, even if we were going to stay in the European Union, that here's a system that doesn't work. But surely, folks, as we're leaving the European Union, we've got a fantastic opportunity to get ourselves back, at least with that part of the world, on an even keel very easily. And Brendan, our first caller, suggests that basically, whether you're travelling to Britain, or let's say you're a Polish worker, you're working in Britain, you're working hard and obeying the law and doing your stuff, but you know, if Brendan's scheme was in place, one of the prerequisites for getting that job in Britain is you would have to have medical insurance, just as I would if I went to get a job in New York or virtually anywhere else in the world. Our third caller is Ma in Palmer's Green. Ma, what do you think about this proposal? I mean, I think it's time we got tough on this.
Absolutely. It's Mark, actually, in Palmer's Green.
Sorry, misspelling.
That's right. No problem. Yeah, no, I've got four aunties that are nurses, and they've been nurses for many years now, and they've been banging on about this problem for years. And when you brought this up in that debate, they applauded you for it. They said something needs to be done, and all of them voted leave. All four of my aunties voted leave because, you know, they just said something has to happen. There has to be a department or something like that in each hospital dealing with this, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, you know, your point about what I said back in 15 and the outrage and the, as I say, being branded as shock and awful. What was interesting was there was an opinion poll done just a few days later. It was a YouGov poll of 2,000 people, so, you know, a serious size sample. And it found that 50% supported my comments with only 34% opposed. So, yet again, what happened in 2015 was I said something that had public support, and yet our political class were just completely out of touch with the thoughts and views of ordinary people. And Mark, it's interesting because, I think what you said about the nurses, and we see these doctors now breaking cover. I think people who work within the system, particularly maternity, people working, within maternity, seeing people flying in repeatedly to have their kids in this country, which is an expensive thing. And I think there's actually great anger there within the health service. I wonder what Claire in Manchester thinks. Claire, should we get tough on health tourism?
I would just say to everybody who's listening, and anybody who feels that this is they're sort of a bit soft on this issue, or perhaps they're naive, or they think, oh, it would only bring in a pittance anyway, it's not worth doing. If you see your relatives suffer like I did, in agony, and I'm not having to go at the nurses, but due to an inadequate National Health Service, and this happened many years ago, if you see your relative die in agony, then you would change your mind. You would realise that we need to gather in every penny that we can. And the other point I would make is that when I go on holiday, there's no way I would dream of not having travel insurance. And if there is anybody out there who thinks that he would dare get on a plane without travel insurance, then they're incredibly naive.
Claire, a simple point, beautifully made. You're listening to Nigel Farage exclusively here on LBC. The time is 7:15.
They keep London safe every day.
We're doing our job. That's what we're there for. That's what London wants us to do.
Now it's time to do your bit and vote for London's bravest police officer.
My name is PC Madden. I'm a police officer attached to Peckham Response Team. That man has set fire to 2 cars, dragged those petrol canisters into a block of flats, and then set fire to them. When we first got there was a pregnant lady trapped on the first floor balcony screaming for help. There was a baby inside the block who was actually targeted by the suspects as part of the fire. There was a very elderly gentleman on the top floor. So there was a lot of work to be done, and those officers, particularly the ones who went to the top floor, where, as you can imagine, the smoke is unbelievably thick. You just couldn't see anything.
LBC supporting excellence in total policing awards. To hear from all the nominees and cast your vote, go to lbc.co.uk.
If your company is considering a merger or acquisition, it's time to start thinking about how your office space will cope. Speak to Maris Interiors, the experts in office design and fit-out. Initial consultations, design ideas and budgets are provided without charge and will show you all the available options. To arrange a meeting or find out more about what we can do for you, visit officerelocation.co.uk. Maris, workplace, design, experts.
I'm really proud of my dad. He put everything into the farm, ploughing the fields, fixing the fences. Now I think of it, he spent more time talking to his tractor than he did to Mum. When it came to organising a hearse for his funeral, there was only one choice.
At the Co-op, we know how important those personal touches are. With over 100 years of experience, we'll do everything we can to help you give a loved one a fitting farewell. Co-op Funeral Care. Call or visit us online.
What is the only bird that can fly backwards? What's the name for a fear of cheese? What are the pieces of paper from a hole punch called?
If you know, you have exceptional general knowledge. But at Hiscox, our insurance experts have chosen small business as their specialist subject. That's why more than 200,000 UK businesses rely on us to help provide the right cover. Hiscox, business insurance for the small and the brave.
And the answers: A, the hummingbird, B, turophobia, C, chads.
From an amazing chorus to perfect silence. Discover where extraordinary happens with Royal Caribbean. If you book one all-inclusive cruise fare, you'll get another half price. Plus, there's 50% off kids' fares too. Visit royalcaribbean.co.uk or contact your travel agent. Book by the 6th of March. Saving is for stateroom cruise fares only on selected 2017 European sailings. Conditions and exclusions apply. Atoll protected.
Don't ignore it's the law to have a work... Don't ignore the workplace pension. Get to know your responsibilities with help from the pensions regulator. Visit workplacepensions.gov.uk.
JustATrader.com. Washing machine on the blink? No problem. Just show with your clothes on. Job done. And you'll smell like coconut cream. Or get yourself on trustatrader.com and find the right person to do the job for you. Pop in your postcode and the trade you need, then you can choose from loads of tried and tested tradespeople in your area. Reviewed, reputable, right good tradespeople. Visit trustedtrader.com.
This is LBC, the Nigel Farage Show. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage on LBC.
Well, I'm talking about health tourism, and my colours were nailed to the mast very firmly in the general election, where I said I thought the thing was an outrage and that it was costing £2 billion a year. And not only was I told that was a gross exaggeration, but sort of have a listen to this. SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon said, one of the things we've learned is there's nothing Farage won't blame on foreigners. Gosh, what an awful person I am. And Ed Miliband tweeted afterwards, Farage's comments were disgusting, adding he should be ashamed of himself. The fact he isn't says so much. And you heard Leanne Wood on the clip earlier after the news at 7. So wall-to-wall condemnation of me. And yet here we are, a couple of years on, and I'm asking you, given this debate's kicked off, is it time we got tough on health tourism? And so far, all of your phone calls have said not only should we, but one or two have suggested ideas like travel insurance. Your tweets and texts coming in too. Tweet, the NHS needs intensive care. Therefore, we must introduce a ban on health tourism unless payment is guaranteed first. And that's from Pete. Anne Cooper on Twitter says, yes, Nigel, NHS tourism is destroying our NHS. Make them pay or keep them out. And Jamie Bostock from Blackpool texts, he says, Nigel, we should be putting British people first, just like Trump is doing in America. And I want to appeal. Perhaps Ed Miliband, if you're listening, or, you know, Nicola Sturgeon, or any of you. But actually, I'd rather hear not from career politicians. If you think there's something wrong with what I'm saying, if you think I'm being mean-spirited, then please call me and please let me know. And I want to ask Sanjay in Walthamstow. Sanjay, what do you think? Is it time to get tough?
I don't think it is time to get tough. I think that people come to this country, even if it's on holiday, they do their shopping, they pay the VAT, they go to the taxi, they pay the taxi driver. And also, I think as a people, as a world, we come here and we have paid in many other ways. And if you come to visit, we look after you, and we must look after each other in such a manner.
Well, Sanjay, that point might be valid and might be reasonable, but just look at what's happening with our colleagues in the European Union, where we're paying out £675 million every year for care. We're only getting 50 million back. And frankly, Sanjay, I feel that this whole system is taking the mickey out of British taxpayers.
Yes, I agree that it is putting pressure on the taxpayer of Britain. However, I also think that from a human point of view, we must take care of one another, and it is for our politicians to pay and not be greedy, because this is a fair way of doing activities in such a manner. I think that if someone is coming to this country to receive treatment because they cannot receive it back home, that is a question to ask why they cannot receive the treatment back home.
Well, Sanjay, I can't help the fact that unfortunately, healthcare services in many parts of the world are not as good as they are here. And I know our NHS has got real problems, but, you know, overall it provides great treatment. But Sanjay, do you see no limit to this? I mean, how many mothers should come here to have their babies from poor countries? 10,000 a year, 100,000 a year, million a year?
But then you have the blood on your hands. If this baby dies in another country, then why wouldn't you want to save the life?
Well, Sanjay, I think you're a very kind-hearted, very good, decent man, but I have a feeling, and I'll ask callers and texts and tweeters, you know, Sanjay thinks we should be better people, we should be global citizens, and that if we don't look after people from poor countries, we will have blood on our hands. I don't agree with you, Sanjay, but I think you put your point absolutely beautifully. I wonder what Matthew in Heathrow thinks. Heathrow, where, of course, many of the health tourists come in, Matthew.
Yes, I know. Well, I mean, I'm British. I was born here, but my wife's Mexican, and I think it really should be for UK residents, because, I mean, yeah, people do come here, work, they pay taxes, and or get married to foreign people, and I mean, the national health people should be for residents. But I agree with you. People here on holiday, and basically before people come here, if they're coming here for work visas, then they should have the private insurance. I mean, I've lived around in America, in Europe, and yeah, I mean, I've always had private insurance.
Yes, I mean, Matthew, there is another way of looking at this, I suppose. I mean, I have, throughout all my time in politics, I've campaigned against having to carry ID cards. I've never wanted the state to have that much power to, stop me in Bromley High Street and ask me to produce my papers. But I'm beginning to think that when it comes to getting valid health care, that maybe we should all carry with us at all times some form of photo ID, be it a passport, perhaps even an ID card. I'm not saying I'm a convert yet, but at least then if we turn up at a hospital to prove we're British citizens, there's no doubt then that we should be treated, is there?
That's right. I think there should be a way of them checking when you go for treatment. But I think it shouldn't be just British citizens. I think it should be people who are actually residents. If you're living in the country, paying the taxes in the system, then they should be entitled to the same benefits. But I agree, the sort of medical tourism, people coming here just for the medical reasons, then they need to pay in advance.
I think we're going to have to start showing passports when we go and get treatment or have operations. And I think as far as foreign workers are concerned, or foreign residents living here are concerned, I think Brendan, our first caller of the night, was absolutely bang on the money. I think people need to have insurance. Matthew, we're not finding a great deal of disagreement. Texts and tweets coming in. Text here, Nigel, they haven't even picked up on the issue of foreign-born doctors ticking the right boxes to get free treatment for their huge clans and families. Steve, that is a story that was running quite heavily over the course of the weekend. And in fact, I would say, and I know there's Article 50 and many other things to talk about, but I actually think that health tourism, is right up at the top of the agenda. Although Speaker Burko maybe has changed that in the course of the last couple of hours with his comments on Trump. But I do think that a lot of these scandals are now being unpicked. Hi, Nigel, totally agree with you on health tourists. When we go abroad, we pay for the insurance, the same as anyone coming here should. Sadly, the NHS has been abused over the years. The waste is astronomical. Incompetent management, says Anne in Blackpool. And Omar in Birmingham says medical expenses on foreign nationals should be taken out of the UK's foreign aid budget for the country. You're the second person, Omar, that has suggested that. And we've had one caller who thinks we should be nice and kind and look after everybody in the world. But I'm afraid there are practical limits, I think, to what we can do, particularly with a National Health Service that is in crisis. And don't underestimate, this sort of comment, the NHS is in crisis. This is not simply, political rhetoric. Right at the moment, 9 out of 10 NH trusts say that the hospitals are now at unsafe levels just because of the sheer number of people needing treatment. Now, I've been arguing for some years that a rapidly rising population means that almost whatever we spend on the NHS, it simply isn't going to be enough. We have a problem. And by the way, I am not suggesting that the entire problem of the National Health Service can be solved by stopping health tourism. But a couple of billion quid, what they say, a billion here, a billion there, and soon you're talking real money. I wonder what Richard in Walmer makes of this debate. Richard, good evening.
Hello, I'd just like to phone, I'm just phoning to say about the experience my wife and I had in Kuala Lumpur in October this year, to making people pay for health treatment. I can't see any problem in making people pay if they go to the hospital. My wife fell over in a museum and broke her arm. When we said, how do we get to the hospital? Can we get an ambulance? Because she was in shock and a great deal of pain. They said, well, because she's walking, they won't give you an ambulance over here. We eventually got to the hospital, and the first words we were asked was, passports. I'm afraid they're still at the hotel. Right, it's 100 ringgit to see the doctor. We paid that. We saw the doctor. X-ray, yes, you've broken your arm. Right, that's another 60 ringgit, which you pay every time you have some treatment done. They then said it's got to be plastered. Oh, that's 700 ringgit. I'm sorry, I haven't got it. I've got a credit card. No, it's got to be cash. So where can I get the cash from? Well, you have to find a cash machine. So eventually I found one, got the money, came back and said to the young lady behind the counter, what would happen if I didn't have the money? And she smiled very sweetly and said, nothing. And that was it.
Well, Richard, you described the story beautifully, but let me put it to you like this. Your wife broke her arm. Horrible, painful, and no fun at all. what, Richard, if she'd had a severe heart attack and was in need of urgent medical care? Wouldn't you then have expected them to give her that care?
No, because we had travel insurance and we had credit cards. We wouldn't dream of going on holiday without the appropriate insurance. We would have had enough money on the credit cards to pay until we got hold of the insurance company. So why shouldn't other people? Why shouldn't they pay?
Richard, I'm struggling to fight back against you on this one. I think you're right, and I think, again, we're back to Brendan, our first caller tonight, who said that when you board, an airline to come to Britain, unless you can show you've got insurance, you're not allowed on the plane. And Richard, it seems to me you were dealt with in quite a tough way, but how's her arm now, by the way?
It was just their way, and the treatment was excellent. She was eventually plastered up, and we flew out 3 hours later. Yeah. But if we hadn't had the money, they would not have done anything. And that was it. And they wouldn't even take a credit card.
No, and that's the case, Richard, in many, many parts of the world. Yeah. If you haven't. Yeah, Richard, thank you for your call. I get the point. I want us to carry passports, an ID to prove who we are. I want to make sure that everybody that comes to Britain from overseas has insurance, or they shouldn't be allowed to board the plane. I get all of those points and I agree. However, I do think that if somebody's, in dire need of urgent medical care that perhaps would save their life, I think perhaps then we can perhaps I'm going soft, I don't know, but perhaps then we get on to look after the person and ask questions later. Coming up, you'll find out who I'm branding Hypocrite of the Week. It was Sadiq Khan last week. I'll tell you who it is this week. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here exclusively on LBC. It's 7:30 and time for the news with Philip Chrysikos.
The Commons Speaker says he's strongly opposed to Donald Trump addressing both houses of Parliament during his UK state visit. John Bercow adds such an opportunity is not an automatic right. Athletics World Governing Body says Russia will stay banned from all international competition. The vote by the IAAF means Russia will also miss the World Championships in London this summer. The government is promising any money recovered from upfront charges for overseas patients on the NHS will be reinvested into care. The rules will come into force at hospitals across England from April. LBC weather, rain moving eastwards overnight, leaving clearer conditions behind, a low of 3 degrees. Tomorrow, lingering rain in the east with sunshine and showers in the west, a high of 10 degrees.
LBC Travel, good evening, I'm Mark Percy. Well, in southeast London, the A2 is down to one lane eastbound between the Sun in the Sands roundabout and the Kidbrooke interchange because of a car fire. It's causing queues from just after the Blackwall Tunnel with delays of around 15 to 20 minutes. In East London, there are queues both ways on Homerton High Street. That's because of the closure of Wick Road in Hackney for roadworks. On the M60 in Greater Manchester, there are queues clockwise at Junction 1, the Stockport Pyramid, after an accident. And on the railways, there are delays between Shepperton and Fulwell. South West Trains say it's because of a passenger disturbance. For more real-time traffic updates, go to lbc.co.uk.
This is LBC.
Let's start the meeting with a round of quick-fire questions. Whoever gets the most correct answers gets tomorrow off. First question. What's the most efficient way to manage our expenses?
Concur.
How can you capture supplier invoices electronically and manage approvals from anywhere?
Concur.
By switching to blank, we now have the tools to give us full visibility into company spend.
Concur.
Bob, you're the winner. You get tomorrow off.
But tomorrow's Saturday.
A deal's a deal.
Oh.
Expense, travel, invoice. Learn more at concur.co.uk.
From an amazing chorus to perfect silence. Discover where extraordinary happens with Royal Caribbean. If you book one all-inclusive cruise fare, you'll get another half price. Plus, there's 50% off kids' fares too. Visit royalcaribbean.co.uk or contact your travel agent. Book by the 6th of March. Saving is for stateroom cruise fares only on selected 2017 European sailings. Conditions and exclusions apply. Atoll protected.
Divorce. It threatens the things you've worked hard for in more ways than you can imagine. Your home, savings, pension, and most of all, your relationship with your children. Don't let divorce cost you any more than it has to. Cordell & Cordell is dedicated to helping men in matters relating to divorce. Call now on 0330 60 60 161 or visit cordellcordell.co.uk. Office in central London. A partner men can count on.
I know what the plough looks like in the night sky. I know how Eskimos kiss. I know a time when a mullet wasn't a fish. And I definitely know this piece of music. But I don't know my state pension.
There's a simple way to find out when you can get your state pension and how much it'll be. Search Your State Pension and get to know yours.
How many tablets did you take this morning? On average, people over 55 say 4. That's over 100 a month. Well, at least for your painful joints, there's an alternative treatment. Voltarol 12-hour gel works deep in the joint to fight pain and inflammation all day long. Voltarol 12-hour gel. Let's hear it for the joy of movement. Ask your pharmacist.
Voltarol 12-hour MHLP 2.32% gel contains diclofenac diethylammonium for relief of pain and inflammation. Always read the label.
The Nigel Farage Show on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Well, Donald Trump is never far away from the news or controversy, but what happened today in the House of Commons, I think, is pretty extraordinary. In response to a question from the benches about the Trump visit to the United Kingdom, the state visit that is happening in June of this year, John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, said this.
I would not wish to issue an invitation to President Trump to speak in the Royal Gallery. And I conclude by saying to the honourable gentleman this. We value our relationship with the United States. If a state visit takes place, that is way beyond and above the pay grade of the Speaker. However, as far as this place is concerned, I feel very strongly that our opposition to racism and to sexism and our support for equality before the law and an independent judiciary are hugely important considerations in the House of Commons.
Well, that was the Speaker of the House of Commons being outright abusive about the President of the United States of America. And apart from the view, which I think is entirely wrong, but people are entitled to have any view they want about Donald Trump, the real problem is this. The Speaker of the House of Commons, the Speaker of the Mother of Parliament, of one of the great institutions on the globe, commands respect by being neutral. And what Bercow did today was to break every single rule of that. His job is not to make political statements of that nature. And I think in doing so, he has devalued the office of Speaker, and that is a very sad thing indeed. And what makes it even worse is that a couple of years ago, he was perfectly happy to welcome the Emir of Kuwait, who, of course, as I told you last week, ban Israeli Jews from going to their country and much else. In fact, he didn't just welcome him, he crawled up to him. Bercow, you are the hypocrite of the week. How can you welcome the Emir of Kuwait while you want to stop the President of the United States coming to the Palace of Westminster? You're the hypocrite of the week, and I think actually you owe President Trump an apology, and you owe the nation an apology for abusing your position as Speaker of the House of Commons. Right, I've got that off my chest. We better go back to the subject, haven't we, really? And we're talking about health tourism, where in a very calm, measured way in 2015 I stated my opposition to it and my belief that £2 billion a year was being spent on it, and I was told it was a gross and outrageous exaggeration. I noticed that nobody now is questioning the figure. In fact, one or two comments came that perhaps it's even worse than that. And I have had Sanjay on from the East End of London, who doesn't see any problem with this at all. He thinks that we should be a civilised, wonderful nation that open our doors up to absolutely everybody. But Sanjay, you're very much, I have to say, in the minority. Text here, Nigel, I totally agree. I've been concerned for years about the laxness of the UK about health tourism. As a British taxpayer for over 40 years, I am really angry. When are our complacent politicians going to get a grip? That's Alan in London. Hi, Nigel. ID certificates for each person will solve the problem. Steve. Nigel, whether health tourists pay or not, Why does anyone not needing emergency treatment get any treatment or appointments when British-born can't get appointments themselves and the waiting list is getting longer and longer? Les in Stortford. I'm actually getting a lot of really quite angry texts and tweets and even phone calls today by people that just think this is an issue that our political class have just turned a blind eye to. They don't want to appear to be nasty to foreigners. Well, it's not really about that. It's about being nice to your own people. At least that's my view. I wonder what Hassan in Southgate makes of this debate.
Nigel, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
What do you think,
I just wanted to make... Well, I think you've made some very valid points. I think the points that you're making are quite crucial, actually, to the healthcare system. And, you know, I've got a mother-in-law who's just about to be released from hospital this evening after an operation, God willing. And, you know, I've seen, you know, from both sides of, you know, what the problems are and what's causing it. And I appreciate that you did actually, although you're making very valid points. A lot of the time, I think the reason why you've always got the shadow cast over you that you're scaremongering or trying to generate and stir up hatred and so on is because the facts that you do portray are quite one-sided. For example, you backtracked earlier and you said we pay out 675 million for healthcare given to health tourists in the UK, but we only receive 50 million in return for healthcare that Britons have received outside of the UK. Now, I appreciate those figures, and they may well be factual figures. I'm not disputing that. What I am asking you and challenging you on is what are the figures of the healthcare costs for giving healthcare to Britons in the UK versus that we give to the health tourists?
Fine. And I will be, Hassan, totally honest with you and factual with you. The National Health Service budget is about 116 billion sterling a year. So we're dealing here with, you know, a couple of percent of the budget is on health tourism. And I've been honest, Hassan. I've said it doesn't solve everything. I mean, this very prominent former cancer surgeon thinks it solves everything. I don't, Hassan, because I think we actually have a population that is rising, a population that is aging. I am not suggesting this solves everything, but I am suggesting it's a problem that appears to be out of control. It's a problem that could get worse, and it's a problem that is an affront to many, many millions of people who've fairly paid into the system for generations, and finally can't even get GP appointments. So, Hassan, I'm not, you know, I'm not twisting anything. And I would say this to you, Hassan.
It's not twisting.
It's funny, isn't it?
I was just curious on what the figures were.
Yeah, but Hassan, the fact is that what I did back in 15, as with so many things, you know, I come into an argument first, I get shot down, and what is an outrage one day becomes government policy the next. And you mark my words, Hassan, the government are not going to ignore this debate, because this debate has kicked off in an absolutely huge way. Hassan, I thank you for your call, and I wonder what Kiera in the Elephant and Castle thinks. Good evening.
Hi, Farage. I find you the devil advocate, to be quite honest. I don't know why you always have to say things like we have to put our own people first. I don't know if I'm your one people. I have two nationalities. My father is British and my mother is from Switzerland. So I don't know if you find me as one of the people that should get free treatment here. I think the reason why people attack you, as you said in your debate in 2015, is because you formulate your question in a hatred manner. Keep saying things like us and we have to ourselves first. That's a big problem. I don't know why you keep doing that. I think I don't like you, but I do agree with you. Some people do come to this country and abuse our free system. Okay? But I think if you would formulate the question differently...
Well, Kiera, hang on a second. Hang on. I mean, all I'm saying is it's about what's right and what's proper. And what I said in the case of HIV treatment, I got letters, Kiera, from very distressed British people, HIV sufferers who've got enough problems as it is, who have found their quality of care has gone down because there are not enough resources to treat them. That isn't motivated, Kiera. That isn't motivated by hate. It isn't motivated by wanting to stir things up. It's motivated by wanting things to be right.
you can ask those questions differently. I mean, we can maybe go back to our politicians or people that are managing the NHS. You see, you can't keep saying that our people coming. You can't keep blaming other people for coming to this country and abusing. It's because we're letting them abuse. So maybe we should go back to our politicians.
Do you know, Ciara?
And people who are.
Ciara, do you know?
Can you let me?
Ciara, do you know? Honestly, Ciara, let me promise you that I have never ever blamed immigrants coming into Britain to do jobs. To live in flats and send money back home. I've never blamed people for coming to Britain and using the health service or getting their kids educated. And I've said time and time again that if I was in the same position, coming from a country that was very much poorer and had very much worse public services than we do, that I may well be tempted to do the same thing. I've never ever directed this at the people themselves. I've directed it at gutless, useless politicians who refuse to even acknowledge the truth. And when I raise these issues, they say I'm simply lying or exaggerating or stirring up hatred. And you saw the comments earlier from, you know, the last general election from Ed Miliband, and Cameron was the same, and all of them. And you know what I've tried to do is to raise reasonable issues that our political class are not listening to the great British public on a whole mass of issues. And it was exactly the same. And I reckon this opinion poll that was taken at the middle of Febuary back in 2015, when I was painted out to be the most evil man in Britain, and yet by 50% to 34%, people in this country agreed with my views. I reckon, given the voices that are now speaking out from the National Health Service and elsewhere, I reckon if you did this poll again today, I tell you what, it wouldn't be 50%, it'd be 70 or 75%. So, Ciara, I hope I've convinced you that it's not motivated by hate.
I think I'm just saying the reason why people are calling whenever I hear I just started this conversation like 15 minutes ago, and all I hear people calling you and they keep on complimenting you and saying like, okay, that's you've done well and you're raising questions well. But I think the whole reason why people are calling you is because people are actually for what you're saying, because you're saying we should think about our own people. And when you say things like that, it touches people, and people will call you and they agree with you. The only reason why they agree with you is because you are causing a separation between us and other people. I'm just thinking...
Ciara, they're not all bad... Ciara, they are not all bad people, believe me, but I accept your point of view and you don't like me and you're not alone in that. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively here on LBC. It's 7:45.
Coming up at 8 on LBC, Clive Bull.
John Bercow has declared that President Trump should not be allowed to address Parliament when he visits the UK. Is the Speaker right about this?
Clive Bull on LBC.
The most beautiful things in life are made up of many tiny but individually brilliant details, like the tinkle of piano keys. Sounds nice on its own, but better with a violin alongside. And better still with a whole orchestra. You see, beauty happens when the little things come together. The new Volvo V40R design. Life is in the details.
Discover Canada for less this year with the Air Transat Canada seat sale. Just released, there's big savings on summer 2017 flights direct from London to Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver. All with meals and a 23-kilogram luggage allowance included. Seats are going fast, so don't miss out. The Canada Seat Sale. Hurry, book by February 6th at airtransat.co.uk.
Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes, and eyes and mouth and nose. Head, shoulders, knees and toes, knees and toes.
You already get your eyes and teeth checked. Why leave out your ears? They're just as important. So, if you've noticed a change in your hearing recently, come and see how well you're hearing for free at Boots. Boots. Let's feel good. 1 free hearing check per year, over 18s only.
Fast Track Reclaim. PPI. One question. Why have you still not checked if you're due a refund? Even if you don't know if you've had PPI, surely it's worth finding out. All Fast Track Reclaim needs is the name of your bank. No paperwork, no account numbers, just the name of your bank. We'll check PPI on every credit card, loan and mortgage you've ever had. Find out now. Text YES to 82727. Fast Track Reclaim. Text YES to 82727.
A big night out,
a lumpy bed. There are so many things that can keep us awake. But if you can't sleep because you're worried about paying the bills, we can help. Capitalise provides free, impartial and confidential face-to-face support to help people in trouble manage their debt. Find out more at capitalise.org.uk.
Don't ignore it's the law to have a work. Don't ignore the workplace pension. Get to know your responsibilities with help from the pensions regulator. Visit workplacepensions.gov.uk.
Beauty happens when the little things come together. The new Volvo V40R design, now from just $199 a month, including maintenance with Volvo Car Leasing.
2-year contract hire agreement with an initial rental of £2,388. Offer ends March 31st, subject to status. Mileage and return conditions apply. Maintenance covers routine servicing, tyres, replacement parts and repairs due to fair wear and tear. Visit volvocars.co.uk for more details.
Pop in for a test drive today at your nearest Volvo showroom. The Volvo V40R design. Life is in the details.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC, The Nigel Farage Show.
I'm asking the question, is it time to get tough and put British citizens first when it comes to this vexed issue of health tourism? Well, you know what I think on this. And your calls, texts and tweets coming in. Text here, it's awfully nice of Sanjay to want the British taxpayer alone to fund a worldwide free health service for all comers. A recipe for national bankruptcy. Jim, you're right. The clue's in the name. It's called the National Health Service. So quite why it's so offensive of me to suggest that we should put our own people first is beyond me. Nigel, the British taxpayer is not the saviour of the world, but it's being treated as such, particularly in respect to the NHS. The National Health Service has become the International Health Service. Laura in Essex. Nigel, I've been treated in foreign hospitals many a time, and I've always had to pay. Time to stop being taken advantage of and make health tourists pay. Callum from Liverpool. Nigel, my wife had a skiing accident in Bulgaria. They would not touch her until we gave out our credit card details. Dave from London. Well, Dave, I think I'm beginning to think I'm a bit of a softie here, because I do think that, if somebody is in a life-threatening condition, then I think perhaps the credit card's not the first thing we ask for. But I think for most run-of-the-mill things, it's quite reasonable to make sure that they've got health insurance, or they're carrying a passport which entitles them. I wonder what Connor in Hull thinks. Connor, good evening.
Hi, mate. How you doing?
I'm all right. What do you think, Connor, about this?
So I'm actually coming at this from a slightly different perspective. I'm a third-year medical student, and I have to say there is absolutely no appetite whatsoever to tackle this problem. From the perspective of the doctors and nurses that I've spoken to, and I've actually spoken to quite a few over the course of my placements that I've been on. It's something I've been quite interested in, and they try and blame absolutely everything except immigrants. They blame management issues and funding gaps and old white people and everything that they can to avoid appearing racist. They are all incredibly politically correct, just like all the mainstream institutions these days, I suppose. But I was really surprised by how PC they all are. We get these lectures on our courses for waiting times and the underlying reasons behind increased demand on the NHS. And they actually go into a great amount of detail, but never is mass immigration mentioned, not once. And, from a lay point of view, it would seem rather obvious to me that, having over 500,000 additional people coming into the country every single year, many from much poorer socioeconomic backgrounds, would greatly increase demand on the public health service providers, especially for emergency care, which, as you pointed out, has seen the biggest rise of waiting times in recent years. And it's just crazy that they never, ever mention immigration.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Have you or someone you know ever had to cope with someone in the family who has anorexia? This is brought into stark highlight by an interview of broadcaster Mark Austin, who suffered the problem with his daughter Maddie.
She hated everybody around her. She was suspicious of everybody around her, and it put a lot of pressure on the family, but particularly me as a father not understanding the condition, and I felt ashamed that I didn't. She was mentally ill, and I was telling her just to sort of get a grip grip and start eating. And the standard of medical care in this country for mental health patients is pathetic.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast every weekday morning from 7, only on LBC.
With Hampton by Hilton, from a great night's sleep to the perfect breakfast included.
LBC, I'm Clive Bull, and we've lost the line to Nigel Farage at the moment, with just a couple of minutes left of his show, but we will be able to hand you back to him, I think, now. Are you there, Nigel?
Yes, I am. It's like...
Oh, no, he came on and then he disappeared again. Coming and going. I think we better make sure we've got a clear line before we go back. But let's make sure equally that some can have their say. James in Dagenham's been waiting. I think Nigel can hear you. But James, what would you like to say?
Well, I'd just like to mention that through personal experience, I think the biggest problem for the National Health, the money wasted, is on these private clinics that contract to the National Health. I had 6 needles for hydronic acid in my knees, and on 5 occasions I spent 5 hours in the hospital, being put to bed and then up into the theatre. And on the last one, they made a mistake. I sat outside the waiting room, walked in, had 2 needles and was out in 30 minutes. So I'm sure that these private health clinics are way overcharging the service.
OK, James, thank you. Back to Nigel.
Clive, thank you. And let's hope that's the final gremlin. And we go on to Santi in Stratford-upon-Avon. Santi, what do you think? Is it time for us to get tough on health tourism?
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Firstly, can I just thank you for what you've done for Brexit? I waited 40 years for this.
Well, that's very kind of you.
So I am very grateful. Now, I'm a doctor. I want to make a point. But just before that, can I also say I do agree that health tourism is a problem, needs tackling, and I'm not sure if hospitals should be the people tackling it. I think it should be done at the point of entry or before people embark to come here, like people have suggested, to make sure people are covered. But the point I wanted to ask is, I also have come across people who may be UK citizens who have emigrated abroad, and they're living in elsewhere, paying taxes in another country, Canada, Australia, or India, wherever they may be. And then, when they need some treatment, they might come back here and expect NHS treatment free. Do you think that's fair?
Well, if they're European Union citizens, of course, they could get treated back here, if they're British citizens living in Europe, or they could get treated in France and the bill gets sent there. I think this issue of how we deal with expats is actually a bigger one, Connor, because this isn't, sorry, Santi, this isn't just about, this is also about voting rights. It's about levels of pensions, and it's many, many other things.
No, I understand
so there is a big row. I mean, basically, if you've gone for more than 15 years, you lose your voting rights. Does that mean you should lose your medical rights too? I mean, what's your view?
I think you should. I think if you decide to live elsewhere and pay taxes elsewhere, then you're not really contributing to the economy of this country. And I don't know. It is a difficult one. It is difficult. I accept that.
Yeah, it is.
And can I just also very quickly say that there is this issue with health tourism about people coming to have babies here, multiple births. That is a problem. You know, the maternity services are struggling at the moment, and then to get people who require very high resources to look after because they decide to come and give birth here from some countries, it is a problem.
Yes, it is, Santi, and it's, huge publicity about women coming from Africa and places like that. And I've got a third message tonight, and thank you for your call. Third message tonight. Thomas Evans tweets at me and says, "Why not take the yearly cost of health tourism out of the foreign aid budget? It's a form of aid, surely." You're the third person tonight, Thomas, that has suggested that actually, we could take this out of the foreign aid budget and that way recoup the costs. And that appears to be enormously popular. My final thought on this is that actually this is an issue that now does need to be addressed. No longer can our political class, or even some within the NHS, brush this under the carpet and pretend that it doesn't matter. Because do you know what? Actually, it does matter, and it matters hugely. And I want the government to do something about it. But I absolutely don't want the government to wait too long. I think what we've heard tonight are suggestions that foreign travellers must have insurance. Surely that makes absolute sense. I'm suggesting that maybe we need to show a passport rather than going for a full ID card when we turn up at the hospital. We've even got suggestions that if a lot of women come in from a certain country in Africa and have babies, we take that out of the foreign aid budget. All of that, I think, makes tremendous sense. But, Theresa May, I want something done now, because we're still members of the European Union. This system is still wide open to the whole of the rest of the EU, and it's being abused. Please, at the next European Summit, let's get tough. I'm going to just add a personal comment. At the end of this show, some of you will have seen press coverage over the last couple of days, and no doubt there'll be more of it, about a few personal difficulties that I've had with my marriage and my family and my relationships. And I would just say this: all of us in our lives go through ups and downs, and I regret the down that I'm in at the moment. But I make this plea, particularly to the media: please leave my wife and children alone. Don't hassle them. Don't intimidate them. They don't deserve it, and it's simply not fair. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thanks very much indeed. So, John Bercow has declared that President Trump should not be allowed to address Parliament when he visits the UK. Do you think the Speaker has got this one right? Also, one of the key objections to President Trump is his travel ban. We're going to take a closer look at that. It's currently suspended. We'll be talking about the legality of that executive order. And at 9, it's the Consumer Hour. I'm joined by Dean Dunham, consumer lawyer, and the Retail Ombudsman here to answer your questions about your consumer rights. If you'd like to join in at any point between now and 10, then the number you need, 0345 6060 973.
On FM, online, on your mobile, and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the Speaker of the House of Commons says he strongly opposes an address by Donald Trump in Westminster following his controversial travel ban. In an unusual attack, John Bercow has told the Commons he would refuse to invite the US President. The SNP's Foreign Affairs spokesman, Alex Salmond, is pleased.
It's astonishing, unprecedented and dead right. I think there's lots of people across the political spectrum who've just been waiting for somebody to show a bit of backbone in their dealings with Donald J. Trump, and it's come from an unlikely source, but well done.
And Clive will be leading Britain's conversation on that story next. The President of Athletics World Governing Body confirms Russia won't be competing at the World Athletics Championships in London this summer, but Seb Coe says the IAAF has left the door open for athletes to compete as neutrals. It's after the McLaren report alleged Russia operated a state-sponsored doping regime, but Lord Coe adds the country is improving.
Some progress had been made, but there were still some key challenges, and it was the view of the independent commission that RUSAF, the new Russian Federation, was not ready for reintroduction.
The Israeli Prime Minister has asked Theresa May not to let Iranian aggression go unanswered after the country test-fired a ballistic missile. Benjamin Netanyahu was at Downing Street for talks earlier. Mrs May reiterated Britain's call for a two-state solution in the peace process with the Palestinians. A teenager will be sentenced tomorrow after admitted killing an American tourist in central London. The Old Bailey's heard 19-year-old Zachariah Bullen had been suffering mental health problems when he also stabbed 5 other people in Russell Square last August. Chaz Hodges, one half of Chaz and Dave, has cancer of the esophagus. The 73-year-old says he'll